Hey, it's Jeremy from Jeremy.net. I'm a comic book artist, writer, creator, and I share my creative process with you here online. If you'd like to support this channel, get additional bonus live streams twice a month, be able to read my comic books for free, digitally online, and more, you can become a Patreon subscriber at patreon.com/Jeremy. That's patreon.com/GERIMI. For as little as $2 a month, you get access to all that and more. If you'd like to get a free digital sketchbook, you can become a subscriber to my newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. It's free. You get a free digital sketchbook. You get comic book pages delivered to your inbox once a month. You get animated GIFs showing my work in progress and little blog posts about just more deeper insights into my creative process. And, whenever I've got new artwork coming out, new books coming out, all that delivered right to your inbox at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my books, or if you'd like to read digitally on Comixology or Kindle, you go to amazon.jeremy.net. That'll forward you to my Amazon author page. You can pick up books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. This is a psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. Or you can pick up Volume 1 of my series Morning Star, Lucifer's Fall from Heaven, told as a Western. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4 of an 8-issue series. Volume 2 is also available, containing the conclusion, issues 5 through 8. Both of them have extensive back matter. They've got sketches, character design, script excerpts, and more. And also something new I recently added to my channel. If you go to the homepage, there should be 3 new videos there that are flip-throughs of the book. So I've just got the camera above it, and I flip through, so you can actually see the book. If you want to take a deeper look than we have time to go through here in the video, you can just click on the Eye of the Gods book flip-through or the Morning Star Volumes 1 and 2 flip-through. Check those out. All of that at amazon.jeremy.net. Okay. So today, we're going to be doing some master studies. How did we end up at master studies, you say? Well, I was doing an experiment last week where I had a grid for thumbnails, and I was sketching out thumbnails of a Medusa illustration that I was working on. And I wasn't really happy with any of them. And something I noticed was just how awkward. There was something about the way that it was a portrait, like from bust upward. And there's something about the fact that I didn't have the whole figure. It felt odd that I just didn't have a whole sense of the gesture. The arms seemed like they were just sort of floating off into space as opposed to really connected to the body and doing something below the figure. And I thought to myself, well, if this is, for all intents and purposes, the piece I was working on was basically a portrait, it just happened to be a little fantasy mythology creature, why not look at some of the best portrait painters around and just study their basic compositions? So these aren't master studies where I'm trying to create an exact replica. I'm not getting the exact facial expressions. I'm not getting the exact details. I'm not tightly copying the rendering. That said, as I've been doing these studies, I think that it would benefit me to go back and come really close and just look at the heads. This is a Rembrandt. A Rembrandt study. In fact, all the pieces on this page are Rembrandts. There's a Rembrandt self-portrait up here at the top. It's a little bit blurrier than I would have liked. You probably don't really notice it on the screen, but on my monitor, it is really noticeable. A couple of other portraits. And it's odd because in this one, you really can't see the figure's hands, at least not the hand that are on the right side. The left side, you can see the direction the arms are going. It's kind of cloaked. But they were useful for me just in terms of looking at trying to create a whole sense of the figure, even when you're only seeing them from the midsection up, a mid shot. And what I did was I created 2 sheets here in Procreate. So I've got 2 sheets of Rembrandt pieces to study from. And then I've got a couple of sheets of Rubens, which I love me some Rubens. So these are nice as well. In fact, let's switch over to this Rubens here. Now, this one is a little bit tougher because it's a profile, but it's a profile looking kind of over the back shoulder. Let's see. NMN is in the chat. Hello. How you doing, man? Thanks for popping in. So these will be challenging for me, but if it was meant to be easy, it's like, most things worth doing are challenging. And sometimes you just got to step into the challenge and just go for it. In fact, the point of doing something that's hard, pardon me, something that's hard that you're not particularly good at, or you're not even sure you can pull off, is that's how we level up. That's the process for really discover. Pushing up against your limits is, I think, one of the best ways to really grow as an artist. So something I noticed in previous when I wasn't working on this during the live stream, but I was working on doing some of these studies yesterday, just kind of like hanging out and had something playing in the background while I was sketching. I realized I was not using a lot of the construction methods that I learned not just from figure drawing class, but also the art book study group that I've been doing with Walt Reed's The Figure. I realized that my figures weren't feeling as solid as I needed them to be because I was falling into this habit of drawing kind of shape oriented, just trying to block out the shapes of the figures and not really just constructing them with volumes, which is my normal method. And I'm like, I know what I'm supposed to be doing here. Why am I not doing it? So it's challenging. Let's see here. NMN says, you won't believe it today, but I had my first lesson. I was a drawing teacher. I had a group of about 10 teenagers and we were drawing a model. It was absolutely amazing. Dude, congratulations. I'm happy to hear it. That's awesome for you. It's great. And one of the things I've definitely heard from other people is that when you're teaching, that is one of the best ways to level up as an artist yourself, because you really have to know the things that you're discussing and that you're explaining. So, and like I said, you've definitely got all the fundamentals. So I think that that's a perfect gig for you. I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad that's come together for you, and keep it up. Byron is in the chat. Good day, Byron. Good to see you. So there's an interesting battle in terms of these, the construction of these master studies. And the battle for me is when you draw shape oriented and you get that strong silhouette, and I've heard this from a lot of portrait artists, that strong silhouette is what really sells the portrait in terms of making it recognizable. When I draw with a strong silhouette in mind, I don't get particularly well-constructed figures. I don't get figures that feel solid. But when I work on construction and really focus on making it feel volumetric, I have a hard time making something that accurately represents whatever I am supposed to be drawing. In other words, it may look like a person and it may feel like a constructed figure, but it will not necessarily be as much of a likeness if I'm drawing a person's face. Like, you can look at it and say, all right, I can see how this represents that person. Like, for instance, this woman, it's a black woman with a turban and a feather. And you might be able to look at the sketch that I do and say, okay, it is a black woman with a turban and a feather. And you might even say she's got a prominent forehead. But you wouldn't look at it and say, that is a photographic representation of that specific person. Like, it feels exactly the same. Like, you can look at it, that, like, realism. Realism, that's what its strength is really capturing a person's likeness. And for me, when I'm drawing, I sacrifice likeness often for construction. And that is the constant personal battle I have. I don't think it's a battle that all artists have. And some artists I know who are great at doing likenesses and making them feel very solid and well constructed. My personal artistic issues are that I either have to go construction or likeness. I can't seem to get both at the same time. So I kind of go back and forth between the two methods. I sometimes will focus on edges and shapes and really trying to do more of a site size measurement. And sometimes I really focus on the construction. I have yet to get to the point where have the two comfortably molded together. Let's see here. Cassiel is in the chat. Hello, how you doing? There's also a little thing that this is something that I wrote down for a blog post for the Patreon. I tend to write them down when I'm drawing, and I just have thoughts about process. But I recently switched from trying to draw the way I draw traditionally to just accepting that there's certain things in digital to get results I want that have to be different. For instance, when I draw traditionally, what I tend to do is I work with very broad, light strokes, even lighter than this, like having this turned almost to 1. Now, what happens if I turn this all the way down? Okay, there is giving me a little bit of line there, but see what happens at 5% opacity. So usually, the way I tend to draw when I'm drawing traditionally is drawing super light and drawing in broad tones. And I have found that while I still want to draw very light, drawing with thin lines seems to give me more of a chance to shape the form, mainly because I can't smear digitally the same way I do traditional. If I want to smear, I have to switch to a smudge tool. Whereas when I'm drawing traditionally, I just angle my pencil to the side and slide it down. And there are brushes that let you draw with the side in Procreate. But it still just is not the same as what you get when you're working traditionally. There's that tactile feedback that's just a little bit better. Let's see. Cassiel says, remembers Rembrandt. Yes, I'm definitely having some fun doing these Rembrandt studies. I mean, honestly, if I want to just improve the faces, I could just sit down with just a book of Rembrandts and a book of Rubens and just draw the portraits. That's all I need is just do that for ages and just soak it all up. Let's see here. NMN says, could you please give a very brief explanation of how you manage your Patreon account? I can read about it, but if it's not troublesome, I prefer to hear from someone who actually has it. Okay, well, the way that you manage a Patreon account is, honestly, it's like setting up any social media account, except for the fact that people get access to posts based on subscription levels. So for me personally, I usually do public posts a couple of times a week. And I try to do an equal amount of public posts and private posts. And the public posts are obviously like this live stream that we're doing here. I'll post this on the Patreon. And there are people who don't have to be subscribed. And that's also something I can mention to you guys, is if you want to get a feel for Patreon as a subscriber, you can go and find artists on Patreon. If there's artists you know that have a Patreon, you can go to Patreon just like you can go to Twitter or Instagram, and you can follow them without paying any money. You can do that with my channel. In fact, if you want to go to patreon.jeremy.net, you do not have to pay me money to subscribe to follow my Patreon account. And then you'll see all of my public posts. And that's actually the best thing I would say as a starting point if you want to get familiar with it. Because if you're thinking about starting your own Patreon, I find that the best thing is to follow other people's Patreons and see what they do. I have some artists that I'm a fan of, and I follow their Patreons. I'm a subscriber to the Comic Lab podcast. I subscribe to their Patreon. But once you subscribe, I do a couple of weekly posts. And what the posts I do per week is, I tend to post I try to do 4 posts a week, and they're usually animated GIFs. Like the GIFs that you see on my Instagram or my Twitter, there's actually text that goes with those posts. And I don't post the text on social media. The little blog posts, the text that go with it, I only put that on Patreon. And what I do is the posts that I make private for subscribers, I will post 2 posts a week that start private, and then a week later they go public. And those are the ones that once they go public, I'll post those, just the images on social media. The posts that are Patreon exclusive just stay Patreon exclusive. And those are things like, posting comic book pages as I finish them. Those are the big thing is the art book study group that I do twice a month. And what that is that's an unlisted live stream. So I do it on YouTube the same way I'm doing these, but it's unlisted. So only Patreon subscribers get the link. And but you can post videos, you can post images, you can post. A lot of people will do layered PSD files of their artwork for people that do more illustration work. You can basically post, and you can have attachments that you can do, like if you have large files or a brush set that you made that you want to give to your subscribers, any kind of digital rewards that you want to have. And you can even also have physical rewards, but they don't really recommend that for a lot of, especially if you're starting out with a Patreon, because it's hard to stay on top of it. And sometimes you can spend more money providing the rewards, fulfilling them, sending them out to people, than you are bringing in as someone running a Patreon. And that's obviously not going to last very long. That's not sustainable if you're spending more money on delivering rewards than you're bringing in from your Patreon. I don't know. That's sort of the general top line of how I run mine. And I try to set it up so that it really just comes down to posting what I'm working on. That's really what I'm providing with the Patreon, is additional access to my process throughout the week. But there's people who just do their entire shows, all of it on Patreon. And again, a lot of people do like I do, where they do exclusive live streams or exclusive podcast episodes just for Patreon subscribers. I'm a subscriber to the Dark Art Society podcast that Chet Zar does. And he releases his episodes early for everyone. And he's also been doing video versions of his interviews, where he's started recording recording video, and he releases those. Those aren't even available to the public yet. He's eventually going to start making them available to the public, but he makes them available early for Patreon subscribers. So let me know if that is what you were thinking in terms of your question, or whether there's something particular that you're asking that I haven't touched on yet. So let's see here. Hey, I see Amar's in the chat. How you doing, Amar? I was given a quick. So what I'm doing today is I'm doing master studies from Rembrandt, and my purpose for this is simply just to get better at the relationship between the portrait of the head and then the torso, the figure underneath. And I'm not trying to necessarily draw an exact photo replica of this study. It's more of just trying to work on the structure. Like, I do actually want it to look like her, but the goal for me is not doing a photo realistic, perfect master study. It's more about just getting better at, like I said, getting better at unifying shape and construction. And Byron comes in and he says, it's an amazingly tight balance. He said, I know caricature cartoonists have noted that slight exaggeration of prominent, unique features can lend a more realistic tone. Yeah, that's true. It's important to know what it is to exaggerate. It's not just exaggeration for exaggeration's sake, being able to key in on prominent features. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like doing master studies from painters as opposed to just doing a study from a photograph. Because in this case, Rembrandt has already basically decided what the important features are. And he's already kind of distilled. It's like doing a master study from one of the old masters. They've kind of sanded off all of the hard edges for you. They've said, okay, this is what this piece should be. This is what the artistic statement is. And it's up to me to follow that now and figure out if I can express those elements. Or rather, what it really is it's not necessarily a study in duplicating his work, it's a study in understanding the decisions Rembrandt made. In fact, that is the absolute best way to describe my approach to master studies. I'm not studying the piece, I'm studying the decisions. And right now, I'm just trying to adjust her features a bit. Although I will tell you what I should do really is zoom out a little bit. And before getting too caught up in her features, I should finish off the structure of her hat, the skull, get her turban right. Her dress. I will tell you that one of the things that does actually bother me a little bit about Rubens is how dark all of his pieces are. Because I'll tell you, one of the pieces that I was doing earlier, it's not on this sheet, but I was doing a woman in a dress, and her I realized I couldn't see anything in her dress at all. And then I just put a layer over it and just adjusted the levels. And I was like, oh wait, I can see all of this detail now in the dark here. And it's interesting that I'm dealing with a digital image, and yet that extra detail still shows up if I adjust the levels. Because you would think that if I can't see it in the digital image, it's just not there. But I went in and adjusted the contrast. I'm like, oh wait, I can see folds in the cloth. I can see all this stuff that's there. Let's see here. See, Jay King is in the chat. What's good, man? Good to see you. Let's see here. Cassiel says, well, I like caricatures. There's a lot of funny, grotesque ones. I'm curious, Cassiel, if you are a fan of Heinrich Clay. I actually have a Heinrich Clay book that it's been out for a few years, but it's a book of just his sketches, and it's like a 2-volume sketchbook series. And I have had it, and I haven't had time to go through and really look at them yet, but I've been wanting to. It's like on my nightstand by the bed, and I've had it there for ages. I just need to sit down with it and dig in. I've actually been spending some time lately reading more fiction, reading novels, because I fell out of the habit of doing that for a while. And I think it's a good habit. My brain works better when I inject fiction into it as opposed to just reading nonfiction or just reading comics. I think it's just like your body, the mind needs a healthy diet that is diverse, you know, not just watching TV and movies, but consuming books, consuming comics, consuming nonfiction, consuming fiction, history, biographies, a whole variety of information. I think it keeps your brain nimble. So I've been trying to get back to that. Yeah, see, the challenge with this particular portrait is that it disappears behind her so much into the dark that I really have no idea how much of her back is there. But maybe that's the point, is that if I don't know what's there, I need to just make a friggin' decision. And I think that is another artistic problem I have, is when I don't have all of the information, I just try to draw the information that is available instead of saying, okay, I'm just going to put a sleeve here and say, this is this woman's arm. And just have it going, deciding that it's going to go downward. Yeah, sometimes you just got to go in and say, all right, this is what it's going to be. Not getting her turban and having that wrap over. Let's see here. Cassiel says, I can see that you made the mouth less prominent. And yeah, I actually Cassiel said when Amar showed up, he says the philosopher is here. Yes, the philosopher is here to kick down the knowledge. NMN says, thank you. I had no idea there are posts on Patreon. Thanks for the explanation. And I recommend that to all you guys. Is if there's artists that you're interested in, you don't need to pay for a Patreon subscription to just follow people. If you're just curious about what Patreon is and you've never spent any time on the platform, just sign up to Patreon the same way you sign up to Twitter or Instagram, and you can just follow artists without subscribing to their Patreon. You can follow artists, follow writers, follow people that you're interested in. Now, I will tell you that you have to search for those people. It's not something where you're just going to easily run over it. And that's one of the big things about Patreon is that they really are not big on discovery and having an algorithm where, depending on what you look on, they'll show you, well, maybe you want to subscribe to this person, maybe you want to subscribe to that person. You're kind of just out there on the wild, and you have to go find the person you're looking for. And that is intentional by design, because Patreon doesn't want people trying to game the system to try and get subscribers. They really want to make it where you have to find people that are interested in your work, and they will come to the platform specifically seeking you out. And I think that that's actually a smart move, even though a lot of creators complain about that. But I think that it lowers a lot of the clickbaity trying to do stuff just to be provocative or game the system. It cuts down, I think, a lot of that on Patreon. It really just comes down to, do you have people that are interested in what you're doing and want to see more, or just want to support what you're doing? That is what that's what it's really good for. So actually, I like that. So yeah, if you guys want to see the public posts that I make, go over, follow me on Patreon, and just follow. You don't need to subscribe. Let's see here. What else? Yeah, Cassiel mentions I had brought up Heinrich Clay, and he says, I know it's the very scribbled animals that act human, remembers Disney. Yes. Heinrich Clay's stuff is amazing. And yeah, he influenced a lot of the work from Fantasia. Amazing artist, definitely worth checking out. And great caricature cartoony figures. Now, NMN says, I have never heard of a successful comic book artist who doesn't read books. These two are intertwined. Yeah, I think you really need to trigger your in a good way. You need to trigger your imagination. You need to feed it. That's what I'm trying to say. You need to feed your imagination. You can't just imagine stuff out of nowhere. And when I say imagine, it's like you could say, well, if you're just looking for stuff to feed your imagination, you could look at other art. When you look at other art, someone is doing the imagining for you. Someone is already feeding information into you. It's being pre-visualized. You're just imagining the action. You're filling in what happens on the page, in between the gutters. But in terms of actually just creative thought, dreaming up things out of nowhere, that's something that your brain needs to be fed. And that's where I believe books, reading all kinds of books, including historical fiction. And a lot of times, not historical fiction, but reading history books, a lot of times you'll read books and you will imagine historical events. And then you're able to go, excuse me a little bit, I've got a bit of a frog in my throat. Then you can actually go and sometimes find photographic reference of events or locations or vehicles or things that were in a book. And you're like, oh, that's not at all what I pictured. And it's also interesting to just see that contrast between what you imagined and what is reality. Bring the opacity up a little bit. Now, I'll tell you, one of the things that is challenging for me. Now, see, there's other stuff here besides just making her her lips less prominent. I actually don't want her lips less prominent. I want her lips to be correct. But I was in that phase of going through and trying to adjust little features here and there. And I realized that as I was trying to correct the mouth, I'm like, I need to get the rest of the whole figure down first. And as much as you saw of me blocking in that face there, I'm looking at her and I'm like, you know what? I've got it wrong. This whole face here, I'm wiping it all out. Why am I wiping it out? Because she is turned a little bit more towards the viewer. She's turned towards us more than I have her there. And this is the kind of thing that I'm trying to practice getting better at. Now, ideally, I should catch that right from the get-go before getting as far as I did. But I caught up before going in and actually blocking in shadows. So that's at least something. But I'm looking at her face and I'm like, you know what? Her face is staring more. We're looking at more of the front plane of her face than I initially drew in. And that is what I'm trying to fix. Let's see here. Mara says working on a Crayola crayon portrait and she's finally overcoming her art slump. Look at that. And you're having fun hand drawing your own sewing pattern book. Well, it sounds like you've got a lot of full projects on your plate. I am happy to hear that. Congratulations. Getting over an art slump is tough. And, you know, it's challenging sometimes to get back on that horse. But I am glad that you are up for the challenge. So for me, one of the things I'm focusing on right here is just trying to get all of the planes working correctly. And when I say the planes, I know that you're just thinking about like front plane, like those really faceted objects, like those where you've got like the head, but it's just like everything is kind of like faceted like a gem. And I mean kind of that, but what I'm really thinking about is the idea of having the head pointed the right level. If I put a cube right here next to the figure, let's ramp up that opacity. If I put a cube right here next to the figure, I'm trying to get the facial plane showing the right amount of facial plane versus side of the head versus how much down the head is looking. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get just right. Because at first, my inclination I find is that if I'm just left to my own and not really thinking about it, I tend to straighten the head out so it's completely vertical. And it might be at a 3/4, but it's kind of a boring 3/4, like this. Instead of what's happening above, where the head is, it's not tilted way back, but it is tilted so that it's at this angle instead of just straight up. And the other challenge I find is that when it's very subtle, like just a slight tilt, my instinct is either going completely straight up and down, or I don't know. Like this goes back to what you mentioned earlier, Cassiel, about caricature artists really exaggerating features or movements or postures. Is I tend to either go completely straight up and down, or I'm like, oh, it's like a radically turned and radically looking downward. And that's not right either. So the challenge then becomes subtlety. And also, how do you make subtlety exciting? Because I think that this need to go to extremes, that comes out of sort of the how to draw comics the Marvel way, Like you don't want to have just a normal, you don't want to have a person in mid punch. You want to have them at the extreme of a punch, or you want to have them completely cocked back. You don't want something kind of in between. And having a pose that's just sort of like just a little turn, just a little bit. That's subtle. Subtlety in a ways, it's not that it's bad, but it's kind of counterintuitive to comic creation about really exaggerating looks and feels and emotions and making everything heightened. Um, so it's a challenge for me to try and get those subtleties. As Cassiel mentioned before about making the mouth less prominent, I very much want her mouth to be prominent because that's, I think, a characteristic of this particular woman. But I wanted to fix the overall shape of the head first. Then really getting the sense of the eyes fitting into the eye socket. Interesting that she has no eyebrows. Because normally I think of eyebrows as being such a prominent feature on female figures. Now, see, I think I have the angle correct, but I feel like the proportions of the face are wrong. And this is something I do. This whole draw and erase, draw and erase. Um, I'm not saying that it is the way to make art. I actually think it's better to just know what you're trying to do and nail it right out of the gate. I think that that is much better. But I think the reality as an artist is we have to accept sometimes that we go in and we block stuff out, and then we're just like, wait, that's not right. This isn't right. I need to adjust this. And for me, the proportions of the skull, the proportions of the face in relationship to the overall mass of the skull were off. Let's see here. Castiel says I was in doubt if it was a woman or a man. No, it's definitely a woman. So what I'm trying to do right now is just get the basic structure, the basic position of the features. I'm trying to get them properly in proportion. I need to round her skull, the eye sockets of her skull, because her face, her expression is very calm and serene. And I realize just the way that I've blocked in the skull right there, it makes her look severe instead of serene. And I want her to, you know, while I'm not trying to make this a photorealistic study, I feel that capturing that calmness that the figure seems to have will go a long way towards making this study a successful study. It's almost like I am, and I've thought about this in terms of like just my own personal notes that I make to myself. When I'm trying to study features and I'm actually working on a likeness, which I don't do very often, but when I'm working on a likeness, what I'm trying to think of it as is what are the volumes of the likeness? So it still continues to be the thing that I'm concerned with, which is volume and mass, as opposed to just making something that's two-dimensionally edges in the right place. What I'm trying to think of is pushing those masses into position where they feel like whatever it is I'm supposed to be drawing, whatever or whomever. By the way, something that I was thinking about, and I'm probably going to share some sketches with you guys, is it took me so long to get that final issue of Morningstar. We're getting the trade, the collected edition of Volume 2 out and get it completed. And now that it is done and completed, I'm looking at that cover. You've watched me spend hours drawing that snake cover wrapping around Lucifer's body as he's standing in the desert. And I'm thinking about changing the cover to the book. Not to a completely different image, but drawing basically that same image, but you kind of looking more head on at Lucifer. And it might sound kind of nuts, but yeah, sometimes you get to a piece. You know what? I'm not going to say that it's nuts, and I'm not even going to say I never did it before, because you guys might not necessarily know this, but the original version of Morningstar, the original Volume 1 trade, had a different cover as well. It had Lucifer on a horse spinning a lasso behind him, like twirling a lasso, and the lasso formed a flaming pentagram, which I thought was a very cool image. And when I imagined it, like I just thought that sounds really badass in my mind, and it was. But it on a book cover, it was just so small in comparison that it didn't read, it didn't translate. You couldn't see any of Lucifer's features. It was very distant, like a wide shot. It didn't bring you into the moment. It didn't bring you into the drama of the story the way that the image I have now, where it's more of an intimate portrait, closer to Lucifer. And I feel like that really is what sells it. And I think that I may have made the same mistake on the cover for the second trade, in that it's just a little bit further distant. It's still a portrait, but it's a wider shot of the character. And I'm thinking about changing it to something that just brings you a little bit closer. Trying to adjust the eyes. Her eyes are a little bit wider. Oh, so that's the thing. And this is why portraiture is so hard. Her eyes are relaxed, but they're also not like sleepy eyes. And it's getting that look that's just right of them being open and alert but calm. It's very, very subtle. There's a lot of lines here in between the brow, me trying to, those construction lines, trying to firm up what the figure is doing and feeling. And even this, the nose, it's getting the angle right because I'm drawing her nose as too much of a profile, and it's not a profile. It's a three-quarter nose. Getting her cheekbones just right. It's just kind of a delicate chin, which is also more challenging for me because I tend to draw all of my figures, male and female, with pretty strong chins. Her chin is a little bit more delicate. Now, see, I went the opposite before. Her features were too small for her skull. Now her features are a little bit too big for her skull. But regardless, I think in terms of just studying position and structure, I may have taken this about as far as I really can without going into like deep painting. So I think I'm just going to sort of like block in the shadow shapes. And that's the interesting thing. I look at people that are really good portrait artists, and they really seem to focus on the two-dimensional, getting the shapes and the edges correct. And that makes me think I need to not be so rigid about avoiding site size. It's not that I avoid it, but I try to really look at it just as a corrective measure tool and not look at it as the be all end all for drawing a figure. But for portraiture, maybe site size is much more necessary than I give it credit. I mean, I try to be open minded about a lot of these things as I go. And just because I've been taught to function in one way doesn't mean that there isn't another approach, or that maybe maybe there's always multiple ways to execute any particular creative project or challenge. But you know what? There's definitely, there's going to be cases where my tried and true methods are not going to be the methods that are going to get the job done. And that requires being open to some new approaches, some new ideas. Not that, site size is a new idea, but it's an idea, it's a method that I have, for the most part, avoided artistically. See here, Johnny Fitz is in the chat. How you doing, Johnny? Thanks for stopping by. Now, there's a lot of subtlety in this particular figure because to get her cheekbones, you have to get the underside of her eye, and you have to do that in tone instead of doing it in line. Because if you do it in line, it's going to add age to her face, and she's not an old face; it's a very youthful face. But getting the those areas where it turns, getting those soft turns, that requires tone. Instead of me drawing this like a pen and ink study. And that's really what I'm doing is I'm drawing basically a pen and ink study digitally. I can come in here with knock my brush opacity way down. And it's kind of silly that I'm spending all this time trying to get this hatching and doing all these other things when, I'm working digitally. If I want tone, I can just switch to an airbrush kind of brush and knock the tone in that way. Let's see here. Johnny says he's doing the same, but hopefully I'm well. And he says hello, chat. And yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I will tell you that sometimes I do these studies and I'm doing stuff and I know that it's a kind of a train wreck. And a lot of people say, don't learn in public, save that for your own private time and try to only show your best work online. I feel that there's a benefit to sharing the struggles and sharing when things aren't coming out well. But this is one of those times where I'm almost like, yeah, I kind of want to run and hide a little bit because this thing is definitely not coming out the way that I had hoped. I don't think this is there. And I'll tell you what I'm trying to get at. How you can look at somebody doing a pen and ink drawing and they will get a likeness down. And that pen and ink, it's like if you look like a Robert McGinnis or a Bob Peak, somebody where they can just draw the eyes, the nose, and the lips and nothing else, and it feels like a photograph. But shit, maybe if that's what I want, then maybe that's what I should practice. But I'm trying to practice it off of the old masters. Let's see here. And a man says, "Wah, I much prefer to see Jeremy the person with the struggles and doubts rather than Jeremy the rock star artist who I cannot relate to." All right, man. Well, then I will keep it real. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Jay King says, "Thank you, brother and people. Until next time." Yeah, we are almost pretty much at the top of the hour. I'm not going to go long on this one like I have in some recent streams. I'm just going to get this piece to a place where I think it'll make a decent thumbnail for the video, and then I'll call it a day. Speaking of thumbnails, I am considering trying an experiment where right now the thumbnails for my videos, I have the image and then I have text on the other side of it. And I am considering switching to just doing the thumbnails with only an image and then just leaving the text in the actual title of the piece. And I'm curious what you guys think about that. Whether you're like, no, keep it the way you have it, where it's both images and text. Or if you guys don't care one way or the other. If you're just like, hey, try it, see what happens. Then maybe I'll try it and see what happens. I mean, I figure for you guys, a lot of you show up regularly every week and hang out with me while I'm working. And the thumbnails, the videos don't really even matter to you that much. I mean, for me, I guess it's sort of a marketing or branding in terms of like presenting my work online. Just a question of me wondering whether the way that I'm doing it, because I recently made some tweaks to the way that I present my thumbnails already, Like I used to just try and rotate through a particular set of colors, and I realized at a certain point, I'm like, duh, why am I doing it that way? Just very specifically use the use the colors that are in whatever piece I'm doing. So in this case, this would be a lot of grayscale because it's a black and white piece. Although I could very possibly do it with kind of the greens of the piece that I'm using as reference. You know, in fact, I had decided to draw this piece to start fresh for this live stream, but originally, when I opened the opened my iPad, when I started up the stream, I had a piece in there that I had been working on, and now I'm thinking that maybe what I should have done this stream was instead of working on a new one, I should have been redrawing the one that I already did, because that's the thing that I find happens with me a lot is I will draw a piece and I don't like it, and then I redraw it, based on analyzing the mistakes I made, and then I'll redraw that again. You've seen me do it, where I redraw the same thing like 5 or 6 times until I really figure out what it is that isn't working. And now I'm wondering if I should have done that with this particular session that we're doing here and focus it more on correcting rather than creating. Because the longer I do this, the more I start feeling like my process is not a process of just spontaneous creation. My process is a process of refinement. And I would so much love to be one of those artists who just draws something and it looks dope. But it just, the more I make art, the more I feel like my process is a process of constant exploration and revision and visual editing to get a piece to where it needs to be. While at the same time, I had a thought to myself, and I've mentioned this to you guys, about what would happen if I stopped trying to control everything and just said, screw it, just let stuff out on the page. Um, I keep going back to the fact that when I do that, I'm not as pleased with the results. And I definitely feel like a piece has to please me as the creator. Otherwise, it's the same as clickbait. If I'm making stuff just for you guys, even if it's dope, if I don't enjoy making it, then it still is, to me, it's kind of essentially clickbait. I'm just making things it's like drawing for the gram instead of drawing for yourself. This drawing feels better now, but it still does not feel like the woman in the Rembrandt painting. The woman in the Rembrandt painting, I mean, there is a reason why Rembrandt is a master, because it really does feel like a person whose unique characteristics he captured, and I have not captured those. The subtle wide-eyed look, where it's not like a waifish wide-eyed, but it's sort of a calm, really taking everything in wide-eyed. And I've got her cheek bones where her cheeks don't feel as rounded as they should. The figure I drew feels a little bit too stern and stark. Let's see here. Byron says, we all have those days where sometimes it just doesn't work out as well as we want. You know what? I appreciate that, Byron. Yeah, I'm bitching a little bit about it, but you know, I think it's one of those things where I'm calling it out before anyone else has to. But yeah, I mean, this is the process for me. It's coming in, trying, failing, trying again. Uh, I'm a more trial and error-ish artist than I am somebody who just bangs it out. I appreciate the support though. I mean, you guys really are, people talk a lot of shit about the internet or like people like trolls on the internets, and knock on wood, I don't want to deal with any of those. But you guys are an incredibly supportive group to me, to each other. And I'm lucky to have you guys hanging out with me. I am honored by it, and I thank you. Now I'm just using the smudge tool, which I try not to do because I don't know why the smudge tool feels like a cheat to me, because it's certainly not a cheat when I am drawing traditionally and I just use my thumb and smear a mark to give it a little bit of a blur, or just to just shape it slightly more into the form that I want. But for some reason, mentally, I treat it as a cheat when I'm drawing digitally, and I don't know why. The tool's there for a reason. There's so many little subtle things in this woman's expression that I am not quite getting. I want to spend more time with some Rembrandts. Like I said, this grid, I set up a grid here so I can do a bunch of studies. And I've got like two more. I've got like a grid of four more of Rembrandts, and I've got two grids of Rubens to do studies from. Um, and I think I can learn just as much by doing redraws of each of those as I'm learning just by doing this initial drawing. In fact, what's funny is if you look at this without the reference on its own, it's not a bad drawing. So I guess everything's relative. Like I also I want to let you know I appreciate the feedback. NMN says that sketch is boss. You can really feel the construction, and yeah, I appreciate that. Um, it's only when you look at it in comparison to Rembrandt, you're like, oh, yeah, that's a little boo boo. You know what? Boo boo comparison to Rembrandt's not bad. I'll take that. It's not. It's far from perfect. I really do need to work on developing my skill at drawing likenesses. But I leaned a little too hard on my drawing table, and it shifted in a way that makes me think this table may be on its last legs, literally. Like it's currently now tilted this way. Like just a moment ago that happened. I am very wary. Let's take a closer look at that. Let's see here. But yeah, also the guys mentioned, both Byron and the men say for the thumbnails, they're like, go for it. And Byron also mentions, it's amazing what a little tone can do for a piece. Because I don't usually draw on toned paper, I don't know if you guys you guys can tell if this is gray. I'm not drawing on full on white. If I go down to my background, that's actually, I wanted to just try drawing on tone, which I've been using from my palette. Oh, wait, it went away from background color again. Let me go back here. Yeah. So I've been using this instead, that background color, to draw on, knocking everything down. And now, really, if I wanted some whites in there, which I almost never come in with whites, but I can come in and that'll pass these down pretty low. It's very little. To be honest, this whole piece is dark enough that I really don't need to come in with any light at all. Like I thought the mid tone of the gray is plenty light. I mean, hell, even for this value, that's a whole nother thing. Is coming in and really doing a proper value study. Because if you look at the whole piece in black and white, like let me throw a black layer over here and switch this layer to color mode, you can see that just in terms of value, that oddly enough, I feel like I can see her face better in black and white than in color. But when you knock this down just to black and white values, you can see that the entire piece is very, very dark. And who knows? Maybe that's the thing. That's value is a separate thing from edges and shapes and volumes. And who knows? Maybe just getting the values right would be what made this piece really sing. And I should have just come in and gone really, really dark as soon as I got my constructions down. I don't know. It's another thing for me to experiment with. I may redraw this single piece like a bunch of times just to try and figure these things out. I think that this is one of those. This is one of those issues where doing the deep dives on all of the elements of portraiture, the edges, the masses, the construction, and the values are what will help me evolve as an artist. And the fact that I haven't really done that in the past with any real depth it's a neglect on my part personally. And I do kind of feel, again, to bring it back to art school, that this wasn't something that they were teaching us in art school. And I would be so much further along if my art school had been more academically focused as opposed to expressionistically focused. So you know what? Sometimes you're not going to learn what you want to learn in life isn't given to you. You have to go out and seek out that knowledge. And that's what I'm trying to do here, seeking out the knowledge now. All right. Let's see here. NMN says it's because, in terms of like you guys being awesome on the internet. And he says, it's because you're positive and cool and you attract positive energy. People who are hateful, spiteful attract trolls and haters. I've seen people say, thank you, haters. You made me realize. Let's see here. And he says, the trolls go away instantly. Byron says, comparing yourself to Rembrandt will commonly have that effect. Yeah, you're right. You make a good point. And MN recommends doing an hour-long portrait study every 3 or 4 days, or each 3 or 4 days. It's a really good point. Usually the 1 hour, a lot of times 1 hour is all I get to do anything creative. So I would probably need to carve out some extra study time. AMR says the Rembrandt piece, based on this image, it looks muddy, but it could be the image versus the real life painting. Yeah, you know what? Well, I'll show you. Let me turn that off. And if I hide the Rembrandt here and flip back to the Rubens that I was working on, where is it? Oh, no, it wasn't Rubens. I was just working on one of the other Rembrandts. So originally, so this right here hide the comments so we can see a little bit more there. So this right here was the piece as I copied it online. When I say piece, I mean the Rembrandt. So there's the Rembrandt image. And I was just looking at it and I thought, it's so dark. I wanted to see what happened if I tried to kind of posterize it a little bit, just so I could see the edges a little bit more crisply. And I dropped a layer on soft light, and it didn't give me crisp posterized edges, but it lightened up the whole thing. And then I realized, like, all of the masses and volumes of like the sleeves and being able to see the shape of the curve of the sleeve, that helps give me a better sense of volume. All of those things are actually visible in the piece. It's just that the image itself is so dark. And I think that's one of those things where I was talking earlier about how when I adjusted the levels, I could see it a lot better. And I feel like the painting in real life, I've never seen this painting in real life, but I feel like it's obviously not as bright as this. I feel like it's dark, but the details in there are probably rich, and you can see all of those details that in a JPEG you're looking at online is not going to give you as much. You're not going to read as much of that detail right on the surface. So, all right. Well, anyway, I have my homework cut out for me in terms of coming back and digging in deeper with the Rembrandt. Probably redrawing this a couple of times, trying to work in more times throughout the day, like NMN recommended to do portrait studies. But you know what? We only have so many hours in the day. You just got to make do with the time that you have. So that's what I'm going to try and do. But on that note, I'm going to wrap up our time here for today. Again, guys, like I said, the whole Patreon thing, if you guys are curious about Patreon and you don't want to become a subscriber, that's cool. Hop over on Patreon, sign up, and just follow. You don't have to pay any money to follow. You'll get to see some of the free posts that I put on there. You'll get to see the little blog notes and messages and thoughts that I have that I include for the public. Definitely go check that out. And follow a bunch of artists. You don't have to sign up for anybody, but there's lots of artists. There's artists that I follow that I am interested in and I want to see what they're doing on Patreon, but I'm not necessarily as much of a fan to the point where I'm ready to start subscribing. There's artists on Patreon that I just follow and I see what their public posts are. So you don't have to be a subscriber to get on there. It really is it's a social media plus platform. It's a social media combined with a subscription service. So you're getting stuff for your subscription if you do subscribe, but there's also tons of stuff that you can just see that artists that are creating that have said, I'm not posting everything I do online anymore. I'm funneling it all through Patreon. I kind of have the method where I funnel some exclusive content through Patreon, and then I funnel some stuff through Patreon that later on becomes public, becomes part of my newsletter post, becomes part of the stuff that I show on Instagram and Twitter. So go head on over there, check out the link in the description, just hop over and check it out. All right, so and on those notes, as I said, it is patreon.com/Jeremy. That's patreon.com/GERIMI. The newsletter.jeremy.net. You can get a free digital sketchbook for signing up. You will also get some of those, like I mentioned, some of the animated GIFs that I make, my book recommendations for what I'm reading, what I'm watching. I call it my media diet, whatever I'm consuming. Get all of that for free once a month. It'll be right to your inbox. Newsletter.jeremy.net, and my books, Amazon.jeremy.net. You can pick up Eye of the Gods, my first graphic novel. I'm artist and writer, psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. You can pick up volumes 1 and 2 of Morningstar, Lucifer's Fall from Heaven, told as a Western. I'm the artist and writer. Both books have script excerpts, back matter, sketches, character designs. These 2 volumes are the complete story. You can check all of that out. And as I mentioned on the homepage for my YouTube channel, there's flip throughs. So it's just me flipping through the books. You can see what's inside. Definitely check those videos out. If you haven't picked up a copy yet and you want to see what it's all about, check those videos out. All right, guys. Again, thank you for hanging out, for spending time, for the great conversations in the chat and all of the encouragement. I hope I encourage you guys. I hope you guys bravely battle against whatever creative struggles you're having and enjoy it. You know, they're challenges, they're not struggles. Have fun, lean into it, learn, press up against your creative limits, push yourself. That's what I'm doing. But we're doing it with a smile. It's like having a good workout, come out from the gym. Instead of hating it, you come out, you're like, damn, I busted my ass, but I feel great. That's how I feel. So hopefully you guys do too. That's it for now. Go be creative.